Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Daily Coast Debrief. It's our weekly show about politics. I'm Marcos Militis. I am here with Carrie Alaveld, and this is Ukraine Week. We've been talking about making Ukraine the topic the first week
Tuesday
of the month.
of
Yeah, the
every
first
month.
Tuesday of the
Yeah.
month, and so that's what we're doing today. And Carrie, I'm I gotta say, I'm so excited about today's guest. Um, and let me tell you a little bit about him before we bring him on, just because this guy is so freaking cool. His name is Dimitri. He is an Estonian who's living in London, and from the very beginning of the war, and we'll ask him a little bit more about that. But he translates material coming from the Russian side. So there's social media, their videos, their proclamations. So he is able to give us an insight into what Russia is saying and thinking at all parts of this war. And he just produces an unbelievable amount of translation of information. His Twitter handle is WarTranslated at WarTranslated, and he has a website as well with that same name. And I wouldn't be a quarter as smart as I am about this war without Dimitri. And so it is an incredible treat. I'm so excited to meet him today and to talk to him about the work he does and what he's seeing from that Russian side. It's like a window into this bizarro world, and I don't know what we'd do without him. So I'm pretty excited.
Me too. I'm super excited. Actually, you shared a couple of his translations with me, and I listened to them, and I was like, "Wow, this is, this is raw. Like this is raw material from Russian soldiers, and it's just fascinating to hear them talk because it's nothing like what you're hearing from the Russian military, the Russian elite. So anyway,
Yeah, so I actually think we can bring him right on. So again, today's guest is Dimitri from War Translated. He is in London, and he was kind enough to join us, even though it's getting late out where he's at. Dimitri, thank you so very much for joining us.
Hey everyone, and yeah, I'm very glad to be on your show, and it's really awesome. I've been sort of a fan of your website for quite some time as well. Well, not quite some time, but about a year. But yeah, it's been a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here.
And I will say I hope I was one of the first people to donate when you first started asking people to help out with the work you're doing, because I find it so incredibly valuable. Like I said in the intro, I wouldn't be a quarter as smart as I am about the war without your insight and the information you sent. So you are an Estonian living in London. How do you come about learning Russian and being in a position to be such an important part of this information, uh, you know, uh, operation on Twitter and otherwise to inform the world about what Russia's thinking and doing?
Yeah, so the situation with me knowing Russian, it's quite as complicated as it gets anywhere in Europe with languages and countries that we have. But I'm actually a native Russian speaker, so my name is Russian. So I come from a family who's half Ukrainian, half Russian. So actually, my first language is Russian, and Estonian is my second language. Although obviously I've been learning it from very young age, as I was born in Estonia. And yeah, so that's where my interests. I mean, I can go a long way into explaining how various dynamics of being Russian, non-Russian work in Eastern Europe. It's a topic of its own. But being, coming from you could say people don't like it, but post-Soviet country, and having parents with this heritage, they settled in Estonia while they were young, back in the Soviet times, like millions and millions of people, from the whole country of the USSR back in the day. So I mean, I've always been interested in military history and history in general since I was a child. So I studied politics in the university. So it's a mix of everything coming together, heritage, interests, and just ongoing events that bring me to where I am right now, I suppose, and to a certain extent as well, social media. I mean, my main job is the social media management, so I kind of know a few things here and there on how these things work, at least, which definitely helped me to get to where I am right now, I suppose. Although that's a bit pretentious, but yeah, yeah.
Not pretentious at all. So, I mean the fact that you work in social media sort of goes a long way to explaining how you were able to leverage, but you jumped onto something that I don't think anybody was doing at the time. And I remember in those early days of the war, just me desperately looking for any sorts of information. And I don't remember how long it took for me to find you, but it was pretty quick. I mean, I think you were doing it from very early in the war, right?
The most hilarious thing, going back 1 year, is that all the sources that I used to watch and look for when in the early days, perhaps even in the build-up to the 24th of February, a lot of them are actually now following me for the information. So,
Oh,
and it's kind
Of
of
course they are.
funny. It's quite funny, and honestly, and not something that I expected, because at this point in time, I'm really, sort of into. As a minor clarification, Marcus, by the way, yeah, it's not just the Russian sources that I'm looking at, but I also like translating various
Yeah.
Ukrainian sources. Not as many. I don't have as big of a list, perhaps. And Ukrainian is a different language from Russian, so it takes some time to get used to, but it's a bit easier. But still, I try to, if I find a really awesome video about some Ukrainian soldiers that is really uplifting, or if I find sometimes I jump into translating accounts of reliable Ukrainian Telegram or YouTube sources that I see, who are, in my opinion, provide a good information, reliable information, and I will translate them as well. And I've had a few of those. I drop them quite often because sometimes they go into doing some different things that are not really worth spending my time on. But I try to do that both sides as well. But Russians obviously is a bit more insightful for people and sometimes funny. So that's why it's really popular. And when you say no one's been really doing that, unfortunately no one's still really doing that apart from a couple of people I know.
Julia
And
Davis, yeah, who does
yeah,
the talk shows, the Russian talk shows.
yeah.
And I know you have a couple of people helping you out sometimes, but yeah, there's not a lot still.
No, so essentially, I have to say that the sort of the amount of content I've been putting out, I'm putting out right now is a bit less than before in the past month or so, just mainly because it's not a lot happening, and I feel like I've slightly overworked myself doing it for the whole year. We're spending really enormous hours, but so essentially, in terms of volunteers and helpers, I had a couple of people approach me and ask and say, in fact, I've had hundreds of people approach me and say that they wanted to help, but it's for them, it's a bit difficult to sort of plug into what I'm doing and do exactly the things I'm doing, because it takes absolute hours, and it's really quite stressful. It can be, you can spend hours on the video. Not a lot of people want to do that, even as volunteers. But we still had a couple of volunteers that I'm really grateful for. So they would watch Russian speaking live streams. So there's a big segment on YouTube that are Russian Ukrainian speaking. There's millions of views. There's people like politicians, lawyers. They have the live streams where they invite guests, like for example the Alexei Arestovich, who is a former advisor to Yermak in Ukraine. So he does live streams with one of the really notable journalists, or sorry, lawyers in Russia, Fagin. So and these were really helpful to people at the start of the war, especially because being in the president's office, he would come back to the live stream with some news, and he would tell a lot of important information in those early days, and they still do that, by the way. But so I started sort of making summaries of their discussions, which is about an hour usually, and and then I started putting everything together in a 1,000-word summary. But then some people approached me and just said that maybe I could give you a hand. And then we had maybe about 5 or 6 people at the peak that would just do shifts translating these videos.
Hmm.
So I recently had a little poll on my page, just seeing if people want these back, because Arestovich, he left the office. So he's now an independent person. So I was a bit, careful not to expose too much, or not to expose him too much. And the majority of people voted against it. So there were some considerations to doing some other live streams, but it's a lot of work as well. Even summaries, it's an hour. If it's an hour-long video, you have to watch it, make notes as you go, produce
Yeah,
a
brutal.
1,000-word summary. It has to be, with good grammar. It needs to be properly written. So it takes a few hours. I feel my own people on my team were burned out, and some of them just said, "I can't do this anymore." So essentially, but then when it comes to doing more as well, it's translation is as on its own is very expensive. So I can put my free time into it, but I'm limited by that free time. So I cannot really go and hire other people, because that needs funds, and then it needs to also a very careful allocation of funds, because you can spend a lot of time doing something that's not worthwhile. So because I have to use a lot of judgment in terms of what I'm translating as well. So if I was Carrie, go on, yeah.
Sorry, I was going to ask you, what has been the most surprising place where you've seen your translation show up, or who has been, you've obviously you said you'd been contacted by hundreds of people to potentially help out, but have you been contacted by anyone that you found really surprising, not in terms of offering to help out, but, on either side of the war or whatever? I'm interested in, because obviously this appears to have blossomed into something that you didn't quite imagine it would be. It's probably much bigger than you thought, maybe, as well as more time consuming and everything. But I'm interested in what some of the most interesting places that you're reporting your translations have gone, and also like what's come of that in terms of people who have contacted you about certain things.
Yeah, thank you for a great question, Carrie. I would say I have so many different and amazing people I used to be or are still a fan of following me on Twitter, for example. There's, Scott Kelly, the astronaut, Gary Kasparov, who's like a famous Russian Soviet chess player, now a politician. A lot of really amazing people. Marcos, I think I remember how you picked up my translations quite early. I think maybe back in April or May, because I was looking at where my materials are appearing, and I noticed that how you were covering me also gave me a lot of boost. So I'm grateful for that.
Great.
Because I was looking at things, just googling my handle to see where I appear, but it's been. I probably couldn't name a place where I haven't been featured. Like all the major news websites,
Wow.
or media. It's probably easier to name those that where I haven't been featured in one way or another. Usually, it's nothing too extra, not extraordinary. I would say it's someone just posted my tweet, for example, a translation, but it's still, it's something. It's kind of interesting that I was able to help, and as you, Carrie, mentioned, it's absolutely right that I wasn't expecting this. Still, I'm kind of getting used to it now. I feel like I've crossed a certain point where it feels like quite natural at the moment. But yes, especially in the first 6 months or so, it was really surprising that it picked up so well. But I think you said, Kara, at the very beginning how you mentioned the word raw in what I'm doing, and I think that's exactly right. So I've never really. I'm trying not to express too much of my opinions. I'm just trying to put information for people to evaluate themselves, and things that I would be looking at every single day anyway, and the channels I'd be looking at anyway as I'm watching this war. I would that this just gives me an opportunity to share them to a huge audience. And I'll probably be still doing at least observing on my own, even without having a following of my own at the moment. So yeah.
Oh my God, that would be terrible if you were keeping all this information to yourself. So the thing that I did not realize about Russia before the war, and now is glaringly obvious, and it really comes through in a lot of your translations, is this weird sort of collective helplessness amongst the Russian populace. They're literally being carted off to be used as cannon fodder
Crazy.
and they will line up in a formation, either the soldiers or their wives sometimes, and they will appeal to Putin to save them from this fate that awaits them, without any seeming realization that it is Putin, the one who's actually sending them there. And so I'm curious. I mean, obviously, you see this because you've talked about this before, but do you have any sense how that comes about, why that exists, and why Russians can't shake themselves from that?
Well, I think it's a classic, really, and a lot of things have opened. I've opened my eyes on them as the conflict went, and a lot of things that I knew about Russia's history, and perhaps you could say Eastern European history in general, that I knew facts. But now it seems almost like this war gave it a certain context you wouldn't be able to see otherwise. And that is, in Russia's case specifically, is the fact that it probably has always been like that. It never has been different. I've been to Russia and I know a lot of Russian people, and um, I've probably yet to meet such a really bad person. They are usually seemed like people, like normal people, like everywhere else in the world, not much different. So I think it's more like um, societal sort of psyche that plays a certain part in what is happening and how it's playing out. But going back to why are they doing this? I think it just seems to me that this is what they've been doing all their history, and so I think that it needs to be taken into account, the fact that that's just the way they work. But there will be some minorities, exclusions. Some will be more radical, some will be less radical, more democratic, but it seems that on average, in its current state, this is just what you will expect from it anyway, regardless of what judgment you might have about them. This is just the best you can expect from them at the moment.
There's another thing that I notice in a lot of the videos is you'll see soldiers, and you'll even see some wives in a lot of the translations you do, and some of the translations that are put out by the Ukrainian government. They release intercepts of phone calls, and
Hmm.
it's either soldiers or their wives or family members saying, "You can't believe what's on TV. The situation here is really bad." And so there is sort of this acknowledgement that there is this propaganda that is papering over the actual situation on the ground. And I'm curious if you have any sense, is this widely known within the Russian populace that the propaganda is just that propaganda and they just don't care, or they accept it because it's easier than the reality? Do you have any sense about that?
Everyone knows it. It's just it's all about how people will just feel fine about it. They'll say this is how we are, and I mean, the intercepted calls give a really good glimpse for the external observer into what is going through the private conversations and things like that. Although there are no names attached to it, and you can probably question the legitimacy of some of these calls, and the fact that there are no names attached, I think, is perfect, because that means people are more, I guess you could say, sincere in what they're saying. But that's, yeah, they're all like that. It's as simple as you cannot really do anything about this. They know there are problems. They know of everything about corruption. I mean, of course, there will be some people will say that we don't care about the corruption. We care that we have a strong leader, and we're not living today much worse than yesterday. It's a very, very specific psyche that is difficult to crack into. But for someone like me, who has been quite familiar with them, it was never a secret for me, really. It's kind of surprising for me that it is exposed as something quite difficult to imagine for the Western observers, you could say.
It's absolutely incredibly difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Daily Codes began as an anti-war website in during the American invasion of Iraq. Right, we've been very consistently anti-imperialism and anti-interventionism, and so it. And we had mass protests, and it failed. Right, the war happened, and it lasted for 20 years, but there's a society that fought back, and the passivity of Russian society. You have a few early protests. They're brutally suppressed. People are jailed for waving blank pieces of paper. Not even say, there's not even it's not even a question of the speech was wrong. The intent, laying a flower in the wrong place is enough to get one arrested. And it's a window into that kind of repressive society that I don't think we get to. I mean, we know about North Korea, but you don't get to see what it's like on the inside. And so suddenly we had this window, and you're providing this window into that. And I think that's what's so incredibly shocking to us. I'm curious what um any translations that you have done recently that really surprised you or have really stood out as is something that you did not expect.
Yeah. I'll answer. Let me know if I need to switch the lights on. It's getting a bit dark, and I didn't
Oh
foresee
no,
if
you're
the
good.
background
We,
is good
we
or
can
good.
see you just fine. It looks
All
like
right.
it looks intentional. It looks like a high production situation over there where you're shrouded in black, but just a white face. I mean,
That's what it's meant to be. Yes. Well, almost forgot about the question. Can you just
Yeah, the question,
recap if you don't mind?
have you seen any
Shocking
translations you've
translations.
done recently that have really stood out to you as surprising or particularly interesting?
As much as I want to bring good examples, I would say the answer is no, just because I've just gone through so many of them. Obviously, going back, let's say a year, for example, there's definitely, a lot of these intercepted calls have been, and the way people spoke about doing certain things, when it comes to dealing with other people, with admitting to murder and things like that, that was definitely a little bit over the top. But I really is just the variety of translations that I've been doing mean that there's rarely anything shocking. I think we're also at this certain point in the war where a lot of things aren't as shocking as they used to be. If we're going back and we see some things being some kind of like HIMARS when they were starting to being used back in summer, almost every single launch of HIMARS was, wildly covered and observed and celebrated and set to a certain extent. But now it's such a common thing, It's almost like Ukraine always had HIMARS. It's no one really talks about it all that much. But so I think we are in that stage, 14 or 15 months later, almost, that few things will truly shock us, and not necessarily translations, but just general things as well, like general events that are happening. So I think that's where we are right now. But personally, haven't had anything shocking for a while.
can I just, Marcos, do you mind if I interject with a question, or
Please. Nope.
can I
That's
just
what a
get back
co-host
to
does.
I just interrupt what Marcos is planning to do. Can I just return to this mindset, this Russian mindset
Hmm.
that Americans just cannot wrap
Hmm.
their heads around, right? This idea of like, all of our all I mean, I'm no military expert, but most of the battles are studied in a sense of not only how do you win them, but how do you reduce the human cost while
Hmm.
winning them, right? So it's just bizarre to think that, like, the Russian mindset is just, yeah, we throw a bunch of bodies at it. We've always done it. I mean, yeah, it's, things are, the propaganda is out there, and we know that it's not like that on the ground. And it just makes me wonder, like, why do you think these Russian soldiers make the videos at all? I mean, is it just an exercise in I exist? Or are they really trying to let people know that this isn't anything like you're being told? Because it seems like so many Russians just accept that they don't know I mean, the Russian propaganda is, far afield from what's actually happening. But I looked at one of those videos you translated, and, this guy's talking about how he and his partner are like basically living, like rats in this hole. They come out every once in a while. They barely get a chance to fire their arms, whatever
Hmm.
military equipment has been put there to surround them is just getting ruined by Ukrainian bombardment. And and it's really kind of it hasn't showered in a month or washed in any sort of way in a month. It's really, sort of desperate. But I also like wonder, are they, I mean, because there is also a potential downside of, maybe he's accepted that he's probably just going to die one way or the other, but there's a potential downside of publishing something like that where like Putin sees it, like, hey, go get rid of that one
Yeah.
dude. I mean, I'm fascinated, and I don't mean to make light of it. I'm not, but why the Russian mindset of these soldiers, like, why even make the videos in that case?
Well, there are a couple of things. I remember which video you're talking about. Well, I would say preemptively that the probably same things happen on the Ukrainian side as well. But people stuck for weeks in the same position, probably struggling, with what they have. I don't think this is a unique position to Russia. It is just that in this particular case, it was a Russian soldier who filmed it and published it. As to repercussions, I don't think it's not anything is going to be done to them. I mean, they are already in a pretty bad position, aren't they? In Russia, while it is definitely an oppressive state, you still can talk. You can still express opinion, and to a lot of you could say, Russian. People who like Russia in the Western media, they quite often actually point to the fact that in some ways in Russia you can say a lot of things that you would never be able to say in the West. So, which when they call it a democracy, which to a certain extent is true, but it is a sort of a it is what I would call an allowed democracy, where you're allowed to talk about certain things, anything you want, but these topics, they are always that they might be 90% of the whole discussion, but the 10% that are key, such as direct critique of the authority, for example, direct people naming the specific people responsible for something, that is a completely different story and can be forbidden. So there is I would argue that in as I live in England, I noticed among the people that they have this sort of unwritten sort of code of communication where people will limit things that they will talk about, well, especially when it comes to really sensitive topics that we have these days there's a lot of discussion about various things, but they will do it voluntarily. There is not necessarily someone forcing them to do so, and they will share share their concerns or complaints about 100% of topics. In Russia, it will be 90% of topics, but 10 will be forbidden. So that's how it's quite hard to explain, but the things that you can say in the West usually are very different from what you are allowed to say in Russia, and to a certain extent in Ukraine as well. Ukraine actually does share quite a lot of similar, you not national, I would say, traits and characteristics, but just the sort of the times they've been brought up together to a certain extent. They have a few things that they share between each other, and one of these, talking too much, can or not talking about specific things, can be there. But yeah, if I want to expand a bit more on Russian soldiers specifically, which is probably you're most interested about, this is just, yeah, I'm manpower has been Russia's one of the main Russia's strength in wars for centuries, essentially. We can go back to World War One. I'm not even talking about World War Two because it's such an obvious example, but even in World War One, the Brusilov's offensive, massive casualties, massive use of manpower. They got their results. So at least to a certain extent, they've defeated the Austro-Hungarian army. So, and it goes back and back and back. It's one of the traits that they just have as a nation, I suppose, that Americans have their own. So that's just what it is, really. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, Carrie, go on.
No, I was gonna say let me talk through this video because it's actually kind of fascinating,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
actually really encourage everybody to follow at WarTranslated on Twitter to get this kind of information, right? But this is a video of it's a Russian soldier in a trench. It's a hellscape all around him. The whole scenery, trees are chewed up, and he is pissed because an anti-tank gun has just set up shop right next to his trench, which means that now they are a big target from the Ukrainians and that they're raining artillery shells. So he says, "Oh, an ATGM, anti-tank guided missile battery, is here. An anti-Geisler. Now they're shelling us with mortar tanks, wanting to fuck it up right next to my fucking trench." And then he looks at and he pans his camera. He says, "Over there in the woodline are the ho-hos, which is a slang for
Hmm.
Ukrainians. It's a derogatory slang. The ho-hos are sitting." And then he looks down, and there's trash everywhere. He looks in a hole. He sees Sergio guys sleeping over there in my hole. We live like fuck's sake, like homeless, haven't washed for almost a month. Then he keeps panning around. The fourth is all fucking destroyed, hitting us from mortars, tanks, while we sit here like rats. All our leadership are a gay slur. Those commanding all this, I only managed to shoot twice. We haven't even shot properly, but we already have 4 wounded. He lists off a bunch of people that got wounded, and then he says 4 wounded, 1 dead. Uh, they're just over here. Over there are other guys. Fuck knows what's up with them. We're getting fucking demolished here like cockroaches. We're stupidly sitting in these holes while being shelled with everything available. And he keeps going around, and then he's all pissed because they've had to retreat. So he says, "Those were our fields, and the Ukrainians pushed us back." And you just look around, and it's just desolate, and everything's destroyed, and they look like absolute crap. And so it gives you this sort of view that we, even historically, I don't think we've ever had a war where we had such an intimate look at what the soldiers from both sides, and Dimitri's right, there's plenty of videos of Ukrainian soldiers just covered in mud and sitting and getting shelled, because it is very World War One style trench warfare. And so you're getting this inside view, and the videos are great. And again, I just want to keep stressing how important Dimitri is, because then he actually translates the stuff so we know what they're actually saying, because the visuals are so powerful. The words really, really amplify that. And it's very interesting seeing, Dimitri translate stuff from propagandists and official Russian sources. But when you're seeing that raw and filtered stuff from the soldiers on the ground, it is a view of war that I don't think any of us have ever seen unless you were actually fighting in one of these wars. And it is absolutely mind blowing how illuminating that is. Dimitri, we're almost running out of time here. So I'm curious, with all the talk of the Ukrainian counteroffensive coming up and preparations for that, Russia had a winter offensive. It fizzled. They literally lost ground over the last 3 months. Not a lot, but they actually went backwards after American intelligence estimates 100,000 Russian casualties, 20,000 of them dead, most of them around the city of Bakhmut. Now there is I'm seeing everybody's talking this Ukrainian counteroffensive, and I'm seeing sort of talk on the Russian side as well, but mostly from uh, Igor Girkin, who's a war criminal, he's a far right Russian nationalist. He actually began the war in 2014, or helped spark the war in 2014. He's now a fierce critic of the war, but from the right. Not like, no war, but like the war's being fought wrong and we're going to lose. He's been talking about this Ukrainian counteroffensive. What else have you seen from the Russian side? And what do you think they're feeling? Is it dread, anticipation? What's your sentiment? How Russia is feeling right now?
Well, thank you for the question. I think the first sense I could probably tell you is that they are worried. They know it's serious. It is no joke. There have been deliveries of various modern equipment, from tanks to all kinds of things, throughout the past 4 or 5 months and longer, in preparation for something that haven't been deployed. They know it. I think they are. Some of them are, like you said, like Gherkin, they go a bit, radical. They are quite negative. But actually, I have about 100 Telegram channels I'm following, right? I would say he's probably in the tiny, tiny minority. The majority of them, or at least, a significant part, tend to just sort of say that they need to prepare, and they have, I feel they have a hope. I mean, I think they still think they will win the war, by the way. So they are still in that sort of position that I believe that they need to repel the counteroffensive, whatever happens, and then move on from there. But they don't really talk about what is going to happen after that counteroffensive, because if they really thought they could repel it, and something, they would be building up really sort of positive plans for their next steps, because after Bakhmut there are plenty of places they need to capture to progress. But I almost never hear them talking about anything that happens after the counteroffensive. So they are really focused on it, and they don't know what is going to happen. They genuinely don't know. I think they hope that they will win the war, or they you might even believe that they will win the war. But it is definitely very stressful for them. If I was a Russian, if I was on the Russian side and I was one of the reporters doing the same exact opposite thing, for the opposite side, I would be really worried about what is going to happen, because there are just so many mysterious signs. Things are not happening as people are expecting. It's where we're in May, no sign so far, of things being engaged. At the same time, we see explosions here, explosions there. They know time is sort of, running out for them to prepare for it. And but I don't think a lot of them believe that they're fully properly ready for whatever is going to happen, which, by the way, I have no idea what's going to happen. I think the predictions are absolutely wild. It can be, I still err on the side of it's going to be something like really crazy that we just didn't expect at all, none of us. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they could cut off Crimea in 2 days and that's done. Whatever they do, it is certainly a possibility, or it may not happen at all, or it might be something completely different. So, but Russians, I would say they're worried. They're worried. Even though they think they might win, they're still really worried and wait for what's going to happen.
Yeah, it's funny that Russia mobilized 300,000 people for their winter offensive, and then they focus almost everything on the city of Bakhmut, which is, I think, the 58th or 59th largest city in Ukraine. It's not even a particularly important city. I have one last question. I don't know if, Carrie, you have anything else, but I have one last question.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Do you see any sense of how Western sanctions are impacting Russian society? Do they talk about that at all?
I would say the channels that I'm normally following for specific news and things I share online, they don't really talk about sanctions all that much. I know from a couple of live streams I've watched, people asking people what is happening in Russia. You have to understand, in Russia, in many ways, basic things is quite self-sufficient. It can provide food, fuel, and things like that. And then luxuries that for us are, you could say, like medium level luxuries, such as branded clothes, something that a lot of people can afford. A lot of people there never were able to afford, so it doesn't really matter. And as long as the bases are covered with food, gas, and things like, and they have their own gas and things like that. So that's not a problem for them to provide those to people. So I think for the average person who's not making a lot of money, 30,000 rubles per month, which is $300, they're unlikely to feel anything except for maybe prices going up, I think. But as far as I'm aware, there are way more in the past year. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, they have way more brand new Chinese cars. So they're replacing the market in that regard. Yeah. So it's noticeable. Whereas European brands, which is very popular in Russia, German cars especially, they're still there, but eventually they will be replaced with something if things go as they are. And it doesn't seem that Putin has any vision for reversing what is happening right now and all the sanctions. I think it depends on who you ask. I know people who left Russia. My previous friends from my previous life, let's say. I know they left Russia, just young people that just couldn't stand it anymore. They had to go. Those in a less unfortunate position have no choice. They will stay there. But whether they will ever started some kind of an uprising, I don't know. That's it's probably not them who will start it. So.
You can find Dimitri at WarTranslated on Twitter. WarTranslated.com, I believe, is the URL of the website. And I know do you want to really briefly talk about your fundraiser right now? You're raising money for a
for Azov
vehicle, right? Yeah.
Yes, for Azov, this is a third fundraiser I'm doing with my Estonian friends. So I sort of decided at a certain point I'm only going to be fundraising with specific people I know and trust, because I've been approached so many times to help with fundraisers, but these are the only people I trust truly. They're from Estonia. We're a small country. We're a tightly knit country, you know, so I fully trust them. They drive cars from Europe to Ukraine. This is their 160th car that they're delivering. And if you go to my Twitter account, you can see pinned tweet. You can read all about it. It's a great fundraiser. Cars will go to Ukraine very soon. So and you can get some awesome custom made patches. One of them with the tank, Leopard tank, designed by myself. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I'm jealous of the signed flags that from the Azov defenders. That was pretty cool.
I have one in my room.
Yeah, so jealous.
They send one to me personally. Yeah.
That's so cool. Dimitri, thank you so much. And thank you for everything you're doing to keep us all informed from the Russian side of the war, which it allows us to have a much broader and fuller picture of what's actually going on in Ukraine. It is an invaluable service, and I'm so glad you're providing it. So thank you so very much.
Thank you. And you helped me a lot with this as well. So I appreciate it. And,
all right.
Yeah.
All right.
Cheers.
Yep. Bye-bye. I mean, I can't even begin to overstate just how important that insight is, and just having that gritty look into the mind, that Russian mind, is illuminating. And suddenly, you see that, and suddenly you start realizing why the Baltic nations have been complaining about Russia, and we're so worried about Russia, and Poland and all of Russia's neighbors. And Western Europe was like, they can sell us oil, they can sell us gas, we can be friends. And Eastern Europe and countries in the Caucasus and Central Asia were like, you can't trust these guys. And obviously the war sort of has played out and has validated a lot of those concerns from those Eastern Europeans. And but yeah, you don't really quite get a sense of just how kind of just fucked in the head Russia is until you really see what they say and how they react to. I mean, Dimitri's had reactions from Russian social media to Russian massacres. And you got these, right? They're cheering it. They're, thumbs up, happy faces. It is absolutely vile. And so, and not just random people on social media, the state propagandists on TV, the actual government officials.
Massacres in the war, like they massacred a bunch of Ukrainians civilians. Or something like that.
Yeah, civilians, and they think it's great. And they get all excited when Russia launches dozens of cruise missiles at civilian targets. They think it's
crazy,
great. And ironically, it's the incentives are so skewed, because if if I was Russian, I'd be like, why aren't you launching those cruise missiles at military targets? I mean, things that may actually help us win this war. But the cruelty is the point, and the parallels between Russian sort of society and the Republican Party are so freaking stark that it's absolutely makes total sense why Marjorie Taylor Greene would be so pro Putin. They're anti-gay. They're virulently anti-gay. The video that I just talked about, that's the slurs, right? The F word this, the F word that.
The F words, yeah.
And
I'll say it, faggots. He said he was saying faggots all, I mean, as part of the LGBTQ community, I'm going to throw the word out and just say he was saying faggots over and over again. So yeah.
And Putin flat out has said that, just a couple of days ago, there was a translated, Putin or Medved, which is his head of the National Security Council, his right-hand man, was former president, Putin's puppet, because there was term limits. So he had to have a puppet fill in. And he's saying that if the West is all about boys wearing dresses in school, and that's why we're fighting this war. The transphobia is absolutely fierce. And so there's this war against Western liberalism that really strikes at the heart of like what we believe in. And Western Europe is a lot more enlightened in a lot of ways in some of these issues than the United States, because they don't have as strong of a Christian conservative reactionary wing. Some places, other places, I guess it's a mixed bag. But that's what Russia, all their excuses for this war sort of have kind of like blown up. There's no Nazis in Ukraine, and Nobody's really buying that there's Satanists in Ukraine. Nobody's buying that Ukraine was threatening Russia, or that Ukraine had, at one point they were saying they had biologically modified mosquitoes. That was at the United Nations.
There
This
you
isn't
go.
some random.
Bomb them.
This isn't some random
Those
crank on social
mosquitoes
media,
deserve
right?
justice.
This
Listen,
was the UN. Yeah,
yeah. Well, one observation I'll make that's interesting is that, based on what Dimitri said, like, the combination of the mindset of the populace, which is we just throw bodies at situations. You know what I mean? Like, this is part of the mix, right? We just we're in war. We throw bodies. We're like chattel. We're just feeding our soldiers into the wood chipper. And that's the way we always do it. And that's one thing. And then the other thing is it sounds like, Putin is making sure that the very basic needs of his people are being met. People, maybe they can't buy branded clothes, as he said. I mean, maybe that's not as available, but that's really only affecting an upper echelon of folks,
Moscow
right?
and St. Petersburg, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
nowhere
right.
else.
Everybody else is like, do I have gas to heat my home? Can I buy vodka? Sorry, it's a stereotype. But
No, it's not. I mean, it's a
yeah,
stereotype, but it's absolutely true.
true. And can I, can I eat? Like, and can I get basic clothing? I mean, and it sounds like between Putin being able to meet those very basic needs, and and the mindset where this is just the way we fight the wars, it's like almost impossible to mount any sort of reasonable or fierce opposition to the war, despite the fact that they're losing it and that they're just burning through people. So it's kind of fascinating in a horrible way. But
and there is that ethos. There's a very popular meme that keeps circulating because it's so freaking true, and it's a 4 quadrants, right? And it starts with it's got Shakespeare, and it's like English literature, I will die for honor. French literature, I will die for love. American literature, I will die for freedom. Russian literature, I will die. And that is ultimately
wow. And it doesn't seem far off, to be honest.
I mean, if you read Russian literature, it's literally about suffering. It is what they are proud of, their ability to suffer. And to a point where I read this incredible essay titled 12 Reasons Russia Sucks on Medium. If you Google 12 Reasons Russia Sucks, where it talks about how during the Stalin times, neighbors would willingly get in the cars with secret police, knowing that they were going to be carted off to be murdered, and they would go placidly because that was the ethos. This is what it is to be Russian. It is to suffer. It is to that is the lot in life. And thank God there's vodka to dull the senses a little bit during that suffering. And it's tragic and it's sad and it seems so unnecessary. But if they could at least keep it to themselves, that would be one thing. But their desperate need to show glory by expanding, by invading neighbors, and by being the big bully in town, that becomes a global problem, and that's why we're facing this war in Ukraine. So I hope that was illuminating to you guys. I highly recommend you check out Dimitri's work at WarTranslated. It is absolutely illuminating, eye-opening, and it gives you a much.
I'm going to go follow him right now. I was not following him because I'm not, near the purveyor of the stuff that you are, but I'm interested. So I'm going to go follow WarTranslated right now after we get off.
So that is our show for today. Carrie, thank you so very much. Thanks to Dimitri for joining us from London in the evening. That was very kind to him. Thanks to Walter for producing. Thanks to Paul, who helps out behind the scenes. Thanks to you, the reader, viewer, listener, for being a part of this movement for our democracy. Glad to have you fighting by our side, because this war is not going anywhere. It's whether it's Putin or Russia, in Russia, or whether it's the Republican Party, they thrive on division, on hatred, on dividing people, on aggression, on violence. And it is up to us to change the political climate to allow us to push back against those forces. So thank you so much for being part of that fight. Love you all. Please like, subscribe, let people know about us. Catch you all next week.